Is your currency failing you? Do you see your money buying less and less month to month? We, the US citizens, feel it, but to a lesser extent than the rest of the world. The US is experiencing Trump's excursion in the Strait of Hormuz, but actually the problem is more fundamental and structural. I'm Dr. Max Nervlansky, and today I want to talk to you about foundations of currency. So give me a half an hour and I'll tell you about where the dollar is going and some alternatives that can help your future. If you understand the forces at play, you may avoid getting burned when the music stops. What am I talking about? What could cause it? Well, just a few days ago on May 13th, the US Senate has approved Kevin Warsh as the new chair of Federal Reserve. He's a monetary hawk, which seems a surprising choice, but perhaps the surprise will be on us when he drops the interest rates to accommodate the US stock market and the President Trump. In the face of sustained increase of energy costs and the geopolitical tensions that disrupt supply chains, dropping interest rates may seem like a necessary evil to avoid a major correction. The result will be runaway inflation that I'm talking about. Some economists argue that inflation will not be sustained and will instead result in stagnation of the economy and destruction of demand. That describes the serious economic crash that I believe the Fed will work hard to want to avoid. Will Mr. Warsh be willing to administer this bitter medicine against the expecting market and the tweeting president? My money is on inflation. The pun is intended. Now, let me talk briefly about the structural inflationary pressures of the US dollar. It has decoupled from conversion to gold in 1971 under President Nixon. We're currently facing an annual deficit of 1.5 to 2 trillion per year, and our outstanding debt is around 40 trillion. Needless to say, it's putting downward pressure on the dollar, financially as well as politically. What do I mean by that? This debt ultimately cannot be repaid and can only be diluted away. This is why President Trump recently has said that he wants to delegate healthcare responsibilities that cost the federal government about 2 trillion per year to the states. This allows me to mention a couple of quotes to set up the rest of the discussion that highlight the importance of currency. The first one is from the founder of the Rothschild banking dynasty, who said, "Permit me to issue and control money of the nation, and I care not who makes the laws." It sounds a little sinister, but there is a positive side to this. If the currency is coming from we the people, then the equation and the power reverses. US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger has observed the following. And of course, he's practiced some of it. Control oil and you control nations. Control food and you control the people. Control money and you control the world. That sounds like some kind of an elitist project, but the goal here is the opposite. It's to fulfill the original democratic vision of the US Republic and to create a currency which fulfills the conditions of peaceful and prosperous interactions with the rest of the world. It's not about controlling the world, it's about enhancing trade and using this democratic currency. And again, I feel that it deserves that description, which will be therefore, through its usage, enhancing prosperity and also peace. The opposite of what we're seeing now in the Middle East and unfortunately in Ukraine. Now, let me take a step back and describe the types of currencies that existed and the massive innovation that we're facing. Recently, that appeared in Zero Hedge, which made some very interesting observations about fiat currency and gold reserves. I highly recommend it, but I think it's missing some points that I want to elaborate on here. Specifically, it talks about the fact that the global economy has started to switch from accumulating US treasuries to accumulating gold. This is both in the emerging markets and the developed markets. And now this has accumulation has perhaps tripled from its bottom roughly a decade ago in terms of the proportion of gold versus the rest of the central bank reserves. Now, this analysis is valid from the article in Zero Hedge. However, it's considering a local behavior of the last decades, and therefore, from a certain mathematical standpoint, one could describe it as still elastic behavior. I'm talking about going outside of this elastic behavior, which can occur when larger cycles shift. So currently, the global system is rebalancing itself to hold more gold, but that's not the end of the story, because gold, in some ways, is a step backward. It has problems with transferability, which brings me to two primary schools of thought of what currency is. And I've done some reading on the subject, and these are definitely in certain tension and opposition to each other. One emphasizes the store of value. One emphasizes unit of accounting and transferability. Transferability is where gold falls short. There is custody, there is divisibility, which is part of the unit of accounting, that are problematic. You don't want to go with a brick of gold to your local Costco and then try to cut some shavings off of it. Not practical. So in the past, any currency could fulfill only one of these two primary requirements, and you could call them three and perhaps add divisibility in there. But I'm talking about two primarily: store of value and transferability. Valuable data can change all that by combining these different properties: intrinsic value and native digital transferability. There is another feature of currency which is not part of the standard definition, but it's very important in practice, and we can see that in the market. I'm talking about yield. Most currencies natively, like gold or fiat paper, have no intrinsic yield, and their production is not tied to the economy. That can be a problem, as has been the case when Spain discovered vast amounts of silver in the New World, and it turned into a curse, leading to hyperinflation and underinvestment in their own industry and local economy. I'm talking about valuable data, which is really a form of digital collateral, and we can build an associated digital currency based on this data being shared with privacy. And this system has an intrinsic utilization rate. It's a product, not something that's standalone. And unlike gold, which has some uses for jewelry and electronics, medicine has a much larger part of the economy. And the intrinsic velocity of money based on it, therefore, would be higher. Digital currency that I'm talking about combines three features never seen before together: store of value, transferability and unit of accounting, as well as intrinsic yields. As we know, central banks do not hold fiat currency. They hold US treasuries or equivalents. Banks could then diversify their reserve holdings to include not just gold and US treasuries, but what I'm calling Galt treasury, which combines the best features of both gold and US treasuries. Now, let me give a brief historical overview of the types of currencies that have existed and exist now: primarily representative currency based on gold, and fiat currency associated with oil. So currency backed by gold is a prime example of representative currency. It has a low counterparty risk and is only impacted by debasement of the noble metals, which of course has been the case, for example, during the fall of the Roman Empire. The fiat currency that we're using in the United States, the dollar, is sometimes referred to as the petrodollar. And that's because Gulf states, primarily Saudi Arabia, essentially made a deal with USA to price their oil in dollars in exchange for political protection as well as access to the US market. The US dollar became a fiat currency after 1971 Nixon shock when the president terminated the final vestiges of convertibility to gold, leading to a massive inflation after this devaluation. And of course, there was a corresponding increase in oil prices. Now, if China was to replace USA as the global hegemon and to create a fiat petro-yuan currency, that by itself would not be stronger than the petrodollar. Of course, who has their currency used predominantly for oil trade would in fact impact these countries significantly because of the increased demand for their currency and associated yield that could be paid on their debt. But if either country prints more of their fiat currency, dollars or yuan, then even high demand for oil purchases cannot guarantee a stable currency rate. China has experienced several hyperinflationary periods over nearly a millennium, and that left a lasting historical memory. In fact, their experience of paper currency preceded European paper currencies, but Chinese yuan is not immune from the lure of free money. And the US has fallen prey to what they call the modern monetary theory, which essentially says that deficits don't matter to the US because of its privileged position with world's reserve currency. Many refer to the MMT as magic money tree theory. Would China leaders wisely avoid eating the forbidden MMT fruit? It's very sweet. So now let me turn to the data-based alternative, which could be an independent currency. Modern technology enables this unique currency with previously unseen and unheard of features, combining, as I mentioned, ease of transfer, store of value, and also independent and what I call democratic creation, because it is medical information of individuals. It's not being sold, it's being managed with full privacy and respect. The details of that have been described in previous videos. Some links will be in the description below. I'll talk more about it in the future. Here, I'm talking about it at high level as a potential replacement or an addition to currency, which, by the way, has existed in the past. In China, and as well as in the US, in the early days, there was a coexistence of multiple types of currency. Now, coming back to healthcare, which I mentioned as a significant part of US GDP. In fact, it's about 18% of US GDP. And last year, US spent about 5.3 trillion on healthcare and associated services, with global spending approaching 15 trillion. I anticipate at least $500 billion per year in this global data opportunity, which creates unique digital collateral that could underpin trillions of annual transfers with high velocity of this native digital currency. The independence of the production of this currency, Galt, from any single government makes it attractive to all, to various governments that may be in geopolitical tension or opposition, as well as to individuals. And of course, intrinsic values such as store value and yield are very important. And I'll describe that in a little more detail. But here, let me focus on the independence of it. It's a neutral currency which actually can become a winner because of its neutrality. So coming back to the current tension and unfortunately probably soon to be resumed fighting in the Strait of Hormuz, this situation reminds me of the amazing benefits of being an independent country. For example, here, Oman, which uniquely among Arab nations managed to maintain its independence both from US and from Arab League entanglements. It has maintained good relations with both West and Iran and was therefore a valuable intermediary. Not only now, but even before this conflict, it was recognized in various publications as a critical stabilizing force in the Gulf. Unfortunately, it wasn't able to prevent this conflict, but it's doing its best to try to allow for discussion. And it has avoided much of the destruction that has befallen Bahrain, which houses US Fifth Fleet, or other nations like UAE, which are definitely not neutral. This is also the role seen by Oman here is, I think, also the role of a currency. It's to facilitate exchange and not be weaponized and not try to adjudicate winners and losers. And that's the nature of a trading relationship. And of course, this currency would also potentially be beneficial because, unlike fiat currency, it would not be subject to excessive printing or mining that's untethered to the real economy. I've mentioned that the Spanish economy was actually undermined by the discovery of silver in the New World, which allowed them to purchase goods abroad and cause disinvestment in their own production and development. With currency that is too abundant, the same can occur. An economy can get monetized, this balancing productivity and making money. And I would argue this has befallen the United States in the last 3 decades or so, perhaps longer. Now, the currency production that I'm talking about based on medical data is based on the total data that's accumulated as distilled data essence. That's how we avoid having primary data and all of that personal information and certain liability, but instead we reduce it to its essence, and that can be shared much more freely in the medical data ocean. And that's an actual product or service that can be tied to the creation of this currency. Now, I've already mentioned several times healthcare is one of the largest, perhaps the largest industry, and it can also help to aggregate through this currency certain services that have gone too far on their own tangents, like financial and banking services, leading to excessive monetization and inflation. So this currency has, I would also argue, a beneficial grounding aspect. Now, it could be suitable for trade even with US adversaries like Iran, or at least geopolitical opponents. And of course, Iran is accepting cryptocurrency for fees for transiting the Strait of Hormuz, and they're setting it up as a permanent system. Now, the final point I want to make is one about the social impact of this type of digital currency. Growing up in the USSR in its waning days, I became familiar with the issue of convertibility of non-convertibility of currency. The ruble was not freely convertible into dollars or other European currencies. That, of course, has contributed to inflation and wealth transfer out of USSR as it collapsed. Those with access to Western currency and convertible currency could buy massive corporations cheaply, while the rest of the people were trapped in a falling currency which consumed their savings. This is the situation I see happening in the United States. Not tomorrow, but there is of course, an accelerating tendency to devaluation, accelerating by the magnitude of our debt and of our deficits. As I said, any currency has limited convertibility in the ultimate sense that we cannot outright buy health and happiness. Money can certainly support both, but it doesn't outright purchase them. So there are many human values that pure capitalism does not capture. And that perhaps has led to some excesses, which we can now see both in Europe as well as the United States. The currency that I'm proposing based on medical data exchange, Galt, is democratic in nature. And I'm not referring to the democracy as we know it now in the West, which shows serious signs of devolution into kakistocracy. But democracy in the original sense of rule by the people, in this case through public production of currency that is based on cooperation and well-being of citizens. Cooperation, I mean exchange of valuable information and goods that can be purchased with that type of currency. Now, this is an alternative to fiat currency and petrodollar, which is backed by oil, that can be pumped out of the ground to limited benefits of the people, as unfortunately is done in many countries in the Gulf cooperation, of many of the Gulf cooperation countries. In addition, to ensure equity, the corporation that would ultimately provide this ecosystem and support this currency would be organized as a cooperative, serving patients first and shareholders second. So to finish the discussion of currency, this currency Galt has a completely novel aspect, I believe, through its foundations that touch upon something with practical benefits for we the people, because it is pluralistic in its creation and utilization, and furthermore, prosperity and creation of this money, its exchange, is stimulated by global peace. Contrast this with what's happening in the West, where there is increasing rejection of the old failed system. For example, in the UK, the Labour Party was seriously rejected after it came into power, after conservatives were rejected. And of course, unfortunately, neither of them is really living up to the potential, to the promise to help the people to prosper, which means peace in Ukraine and the Middle East. Unfortunately, conflicts in these regions are as all our leaders seem to be interested in. So this currency goal would provide stimulus in the opposite direction, pursuing more trade and peace rather than global hegemony. So use of this currency is therefore, in my humble opinion, would not be a purely financial decision, but would have social implications, empowering currency that values people and stimulates global peace and prosperity. Therefore, the social significance of this project should not be underestimated. If you like this content, please like, share, and subscribe.